and temperatures will gradually be on the way down again. That's your forecast.
No mass rollout of COVID jabs for healthy 12 to 15-year-olds for now. The health benefits for children are marginal, rules the vaccines body. Now chief medical officers will look at wider issues.
The risks and benefits are finely balanced, but there are other wider considerations such as educational benefits need to be taken into consideration.
But an extra 200,000 vulnerable children will be eligible. Also tonight, calls for more money for the NHS to deal with the backlog of operations and the increasing demand for social care. Fear and desperation. British soldiers tell us about the chaos they witnessed during the Kabul evacuations.
You can't see a young child, a baby, a woman crushed to death in front of you, and then you having to deal with the aftermath of that. You can't see any of that without being emotional.
After the racist abuse directed at England players in Hungary, football's world governing body says it is investigating. And stealing a pet is to be made a specific criminal offence in England after a rise in dog thefts during the pandemic.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, Ollie Pope helps England build a first innings lead over India on his return on day 2 of the 4th test at the Oval.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to the BBC News at 6. The UK's Vaccines Advisory Body has said it can't recommend vaccinating healthy 12 to 15-year-olds against COVID-19 on health grounds alone. It says children are at such low risk from the virus that jabs would offer only marginal benefit. But the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, said the government should consider wider issues like disruption to schools. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid says he's now asked the chief medical officers in all 4 nations to look at whether those considerations tip the balance. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
From France to the United States and Israel, many wealthier nations are already immunising all their 12 to 15-year-olds, not the UK. The scientists who advise government on immunisation, the JCVI, today said a further 200,000 young teens with heart, lung and liver conditions thought to be vulnerable to COVID would now be asked to have the vaccine, but it would not recommend the jab for healthy 12 to 15-year-olds.
Whilst the benefits marginally outweigh the risks, the risk of heart inflammation is still uncertain, and we want to see what wider societal and educational benefits there are to children before recommending universal vaccination.
The key concern for the JCVI is the potential long-term harms from a rare side effect from the Pfizer vaccine. Myocarditis is inflammation of the heart muscle and pericarditis, inflammation of the heart lining. Data from the United States shows that for every 1 million boys fully immunised with the Pfizer vaccine, there were around 60 cases of heart inflammation. Among girls, it was much lower, with around 8 cases per million. Symptoms include chest pain, shortness of breath and palpitations. But these were generally mild symptoms and short-lived. As for COVID, healthy children are at minimal risk of severe illness, with just 2 in a million admitted to intensive care after infection. So what happens now? The JCVI only looks at health issues, but the UK's 4 chief medical officers can examine wider issues, such as disruption to schools from repeated COVID outbreaks, and whether this might tip the balance in favour of immunising all 12 to 15-year-olds.
if we're going to vaccinate our children, it's got to really be in their interests and not in society's interests to vaccinate them. And I think it is a difficult decision.
Yeah, I think.
So what do families make of it?
People between the age of 12 to 15 should be able to get a vaccination to prevent the spread of the virus.
I would not recommend. For the moment, it's too early.
I think if we want to get the pandemic under control, then we have to vaccinate as many in the population as possible.
Many other countries rolled out vaccines to all secondary school children in the summer. With the autumn term now underway, a final decision for the UK is promised shortly.
And Fergus is with me. What should parents be making of this, do you think, Fergus?
Well, on the one hand, Jane, this could show the care and attention that the JCVI, this independent group of scientists, have taken every step of the way when it comes to recommending who gets which vaccines, and that may boost public confidence. But there's a danger that it will also be seen as dithering and passing the buck. And people may ask, why wasn't this decision made earlier when schools were still on summer holidays? And why wasn't the final decision coordinated with the wider assessment of the health benefits to education and society? And so we could have one announcement. And there is some political frustration about the delays. So, for example, the UK now has a lower percentage of its population immunised than Denmark, Spain, Belgium and Canada. So the assessment now goes to Chris Whitty and the other chief medical officers, but for now parents and children will have to wait.
Fergus, thank you. Fergus Walsh. Well, a former Conservative Health Secretary has said the government must bite the bullet and bring in tax rises to fund the NHS and social care. Jeremy Hunt said the pressures on the sector are only going to increase following the pandemic. The government is due to announce some measures next week to address the challenges faced by the NHS in England as the number of people waiting for procedures is at a record high. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
I'm not half the man I was. Compared to what I could do, I'm nowhere near the guy.
Wayne from Derbyshire has had a painful and sometimes traumatic wait of more than 2 years for treatment for gallstones. After 6 months of assessment, he was put on the list for an operation early last year. But while waiting for surgery, he became seriously ill and spent months in hospital. He had to learn to walk again and build up his strength.
Welcome home.
And he was discharged from hospital in February.
I should have been dealt with far sooner and this wouldn't have happened. Being bitter's not going to solve this. Solving it would be putting an end, so going forward these queues are, these waiting lists are reduced.
Wayne still doesn't know when his operation will take place. He feels the delay and his condition getting worse just meant more NHS resources were needed for his care. So what are the solutions? Major North London hospitals, including this one, are working together to send patients to specialist centres. Here it's orthopaedic surgery. They're doing more operations than before the pandemic and are bringing in some who've had long waits.
We know that waiting with advanced arthritis is causing significant problems with mobility, obviously persistent pain, and for many, their mental health has also suffered. So to be able to get back to operate now is very rewarding for us, and of course, it's good to see that our patients are getting the treatment they require. How are you?
I'm fine.
William has given Margaret a hip replacement. A few hours later, he's checking how she is.
It's been quite tough, but I'm glad I've had it done now. The time has gone so quick. I'm glad I've had it done now so I can be comfortable and not in no pain no more.
This is a brand new hospital facility and they're working with partners across the local community to try to reduce waiting lists. The question is, will the NHS in some other areas be able to do the same? There's been extra NHS funding for this initiative. That's been welcomed by hospital leaders, though they say cutting the backlog will be a huge task.
It's going to be massive workload, need a great deal of investment to do it, and that's at every level. We've got to train more surgeons, train more anaesthetists, train more theatre staff, but above all we need to be efficient. So when we've got these facilities, we really have to use them. We have to use them every day of the week.
You just come out of hospital a month before that, didn't you?
One of the hospitals which treated Wayne said there was progress tackling the backlog, but it was understood that long waits were distressing for patients. Wayne has now been contacted about further checks, but there's still no date for his op.
Well, as well as dealing with that NHS backlog, the government is also looking at how to reform and pay for the social care system. And Hugh is with me. What do we know about their plans for that, Hugh?
Well, Jane, we don't have any detail yet, but we're told going to get something early next week, and it'll attempt to address the issue of means testing of social care in England. At the moment, if you have savings of more than £14,250, you have to meet some of your social care costs. Anything more than £23,250, you have to meet all your social care costs. And if you go into a residential home, your value of your house is included in that. So it does end up with people having to sell their home. It's caused a lot of anger and distress over the years. Then there's the issue of a cap. In other words, can you limit the amount that people have to pay from their own savings? Now, back in 2015, the Conservative manifesto had a pledge to cap care costs at £72,000, but it was never implemented. Then there's the issue of the cost to local authorities of providing social care, extra funding for that, and the speculation that could be funded by increased national insurance contributions. We'll have to wait till early next week. I should say in Scotland there's free personal care, a certain amount of that in Northern Ireland, and in Wales some care costs are already capped.
All right, Hugh, thank you. Hugh Pym. And let's just look as well at the latest UK coronavirus figures. There were just over 42,000 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means an average of 34,312 per day in the last week. The figures also show there were more than 7,500 people in hospital being treated for coronavirus yesterday. And 121 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's someone who's died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. And that takes the average deaths per day to 114 over the last week. And in terms of the vaccination programme, more than 88% of people aged over 16 have had their first jab, and more than 79% of people over that age bracket have had both doses. The Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says the UK and Pakistan have a shared interest in securing a stable and peaceful future in Afghanistan. Mr Raab, who's been visiting the border between the two countries, announced help for areas expecting an influx of refugees in the wake of the Taliban takeover. But he said that aid inside Afghanistan would be given only to charities, not directly to the Taliban. Our Afghanistan correspondent, Sekanda Kamani, with cameraman Malik Mudassir, reports now from Kabul.
Side by side, Taliban fighters and local residents. This is Friday prayers in Kabul. A cleric from the group tells the congregation their jihad is changing from a military campaign to one ridding society of corruption. They're still yet to establish a new government, but an announcement is expected soon. What we want the new government to do is tackle poverty and unemployment. Whenever they announce it, people will be able to properly get back to work and the economy will improve.
The most important is peace, prosperity, second, and Emirat Islami must try to consolidate and make the unity between the Afghan nations.
Already, the face of this city is changing under the influence of its new rulers. For years, these blast walls, painted over with bright and inspiring murals, had been a colourful feature in Kabul. Now you can see women's faces have been blacked out, and the Taliban have told decorators to paint over all of this, replacing it with these black and white slogans. This one reads, "The blood of the martyrs has washed away the occupation." A glimpse of what the new Afghanistan is going to look like. Close by, this beautician shop has also been ordered to paint over its signage. Despite Taliban assurances women will be allowed to work, many fear they'll be erased from public life. This morning in Kabul, a protest by female activists demanding equal rights. Earlier this week, Taliban leaders said women wouldn't be given senior roles in the new government.
Throughout decades of war, women have suffered a lot, mentally and physically. After a lot of effort, they managed to create a space for themselves and achieve some equality and justice while retaining their Islamic identity. If we lose all this, it will have a very negative impact on Afghanistan.
Some aren't waiting to find out what the new government will look like. These Afghans are stuck at the border with Pakistan. The UK's Foreign Secretary, who's been visiting Pakistan, told the BBC he wanted the Taliban to live up to promises to allow those Afghans eligible to leave the country to do so.
What's important for the UK and all of our partners, whether it's in the EU, the US, but also in the region, including Pakistan, is to try and exercise the maximum moderating influence on the Taliban. So whether it's safe passage, whether it's no safe haven for terrorism, we need to send a clear message.
Afghanistan is changing fast and will change even more in the coming days. But no one's yet clear what exactly the future will look like. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, the senior British commander on the ground in Kabul has been speaking for the first time about the evacuation operation. The last of the 1,000 British troops returned to the UK at the weekend after helping to rescue more than 15,000 people. Brigadier James Martin says his troops did their duty in the midst of the most harrowing scenes. He's been talking to our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale.
This is what British troops faced soon after they landed in the cauldron of Kabul airport. The desperation of thousands of people trying to flee a country, now under Taliban control. Soldiers trained for combat, trying to instill some order in the chaos. A massive humanitarian mission that's taken its toll.
When you are dealing with a very large crowd that is fearful, in fear of its life, crushing, pressing against you, when women and children are being crushed and, yes, dying in some cases in your arms, your agency to deal with the situation and change it is very different than when you're on combat operations. There was emotions all the way through the operations. You can't see a young child, a baby, a woman crushed to death in front of you, and then you having to deal with the aftermath of that. You can't see any of that without being emotional.
There have been tears?
Yeah, of course there have been tears.
And they did all this while their own lives were under threat. It culminated in a suicide attack just over a week ago. 13 of their US comrades were killed in the blast, along with more than 150 Afghans who were hoping to get on a flight to freedom.
It's carnage. It's carnage. When that level of explosion and combination of shrapnel is detonated, there is only one result, and that is carnage. But the way in which I witnessed our soldiers react to that incident was, one of the finest things I've seen. They ran towards the explosion. They provided immediate medical succour and support to the Afghan civilians that had been wounded.
Brigadier Martin himself has done several tours fighting the Taliban, who are now back in control. So the question, was it worth it?
What price 20 years of freedom for those people? What price no terrorist attacks emanating from Afghanistan? So, I put the ball back in your court. Is that worth it?
In the end, they helped rescue more than 15,000 people. And while questions still remain about the speed of the government's response, who can question the courage, commitment and compassion shown by Britain's armed forces? Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
The time is 18 minutes past 6. Our top story tonight. There's to be no mass rollout of COVID jabs for healthy 12 to 15-year-olds for now.
This is BBC News. I'm Martin Croxall.
Of gold medals for Great Britain on day 10 of the Paralympics.
Coming up, of course, day on the BBC News channel. Can anyone stop Chelsea as the new Women's Super League season gets underway tonight? We'll be assessing who's likely to rival them for the title this year.
Police in New Zealand have shot dead a man who stabbed and wounded 6 people, 3 of them critically, in a supermarket in Auckland. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, described the stabbings as terrorism. The man had been under 24-hour police surveillance as a known supporter of the Islamic State group. His attack lasted 60 seconds before officers opened fire. Our correspondent, Shaima Khalil, sent this report.
There's someone here with a knife, babe. He's got a knife.
Panic and chaos at the Countdown supermarket in Auckland.
Oh no!
Confused shoppers and an attacker on a stabbing rampage. Then this. As people tried to flee, the police shot him within 60 seconds of the attack.
He stabbed this woman when she came out. I was going in. I went down to the other end. There was an old gentleman, European man, lying on the ground.
The man, who has not been named, reportedly took a large knife from a display cabinet in the supermarket and stabbed 6 people. 3 are in critical condition. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, said he was inspired by the terror group so-called Islamic State. The attacker had been under round-the-clock monitoring due to concerns about his ideology. He became a person of national security interest in 2016 and had been on a terror watch list. Questions have been raised about why no action against him was taken before 6 people were injured.
The reality is that when you are surveilling someone on a 24/7 basis, it is not possible to be immediately next to them at all times. The staff intervened as quickly as they could, and they prevented further injury in what was a terrifying situation.
Authorities are confident this was a lone wolf attack and that there is no further danger after a day of terror that left a community in shock. Shaima Khalil, BBC News.
Pet abduction is to be made a specific criminal offence in England after a rise in thefts during the pandemic. About 2,000 dogs were reported stolen last year. At the moment, pet theft is treated the same as taking property, but ministers want a new law to acknowledge the emotional distress caused to both animal and human. Duncan Kennedy reports.
She had been in the family for 10 years, but last year, Roly, the blonde cockapoo, was stolen. It happened during a walk in open countryside. Her owner, Katie Christie, says Roly has never been found.
I think lots of family pets are more than just a pet. They are members of the family. We really were devastated when she went, and it's very, very traumatic. And it's a year on, and we still are very upset and hoping to get her back.
Some dog thefts are caught on camera. These 2 men on the right took a chihuahua on a London street and drove him off in this van. The government says 2,000 dogs were reported stolen last year, but it says current theft laws are not strong enough, so it's introducing a new offence of pet theft.
We think that this has been a growing problem, often with organised gangs behind it. Often when the police do bring prosecutions, they find that there's other criminality linked to it. And that is why we want to strengthen the law in this area.
These stolen puppies were put up for sale from a car boot. Prices rose sharply during the pandemic. Hazel was just 10 months old when she was stolen from Becky Taylor last summer. Becky put up posters everywhere, from West Sussex to Ireland. Incredibly, after 11 months, an anonymous tip-off has just led to Hazel's return.
I saw her coming up the road and I thought, I know that dog, it's my Hazel. And then she crawled into my arms, and then we had to drive somewhere safer, and then I could cuddle her. Yeah.
The thieves had cut out Hazel's microchip, and Becky says she's not sure a new pet theft law will make her dog safer.
It's only as good as, those that sort of follow it through. If the police don't act and then don't prosecute, then there's no point in having a new law.
Britain has about 10 million dogs, and owners say it is now time to treat them as more than just property. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
World football's governing body, FIFA, has begun an investigation after England players were subjected to racist abuse during last night's World Cup qualifying game against Hungary in Budapest. Raheem Sterling and Jude Bellingham endured racist chants from the crowd, and bottles were thrown onto the pitch after Sterling scored in the game, which England won 4-0. Here's Natalie Perks.
England knew the atmosphere would be hostile in the Puskás arena.
The president of the Hungarian Federation pleaded supporters not to boo. There's quite a bit of booing.
But as England took the lead, it got much worse. Players were pelted with plastic cups, flares were thrown, and players faced monkey noises and gestures from the stands. Substitute Jude Bellingham was one of those abused. Tonight he's tweeted that racism will always be a part of the game until proper punishments are put in place by those with the power. His manager agrees.
I don't think our players can do anything more than they have done over the last 2 or 3 years in trying to get the right messages out, take the right stands, and it's for other people to protect them. It's for me to protect them in the main, but for the authorities to protect them as well.
But many feel strongly racist fans shouldn't have been there in the first place. This summer, homophobia and racism from the stands earned Hungary a 3-match supporters ban. But last night, the ban didn't apply because it was a World Cup qualifier rather than a European one. And that's perplexing to those who fight against racism in football.
Hungary have been sanctioned for 3 matches, with one suspended by UEFA following events at the Euro, really just 5 or 6 weeks ago. And then to see them playing a full house match against a big, racially diverse team like England was disappointing.
Hungarian football has long had a problem with racism, and last night was depressingly predictable. In Budapest today, there was dismay about what happened.
It's very unfortunate, and I'm hopeful that the sensible, rational people will actually overcome.
Myself, I didn't like it, to be honest with you. I think it's a shame for all of us.
Reports containing video evidence of the racism is now with FIFA, which has opened disciplinary proceedings. But Hungary's foreign minister dismissed the atmosphere last night as simply hostile and said it was similar to what Italy faced at Wembley in the European final. England has its own problem with racism, of course, but for Hungary it's another night of shame and surely more sanctions. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
England's batsmen built what could be a crucial first innings lead of 99 runs on day 2 of the 4th test against India at the Oval. With the match and the series finally poised, Ollie Pope scored 81 on his return to the side and Chris Woakes made 50. A short time ago, India were 40 for no wicket in their second innings, still 65 runs behind England's total of 290. There's been a hat-trick of gold medals for Great Britain on day 10 of the Paralympics, with success in athletics and canoeing. The teams also won a clutch of silvers and bronzes, as our sports correspondent Andy Swiss reports from Tokyo.
Celebrations don't get much soggier. Emma Wiggs proving that when it comes to paddle power, she's the best in the business. The 41-year-old charging clear in the canoe sprint to take her second Paralympic gold.
Gold medal.
For Wiggs, the elation of victory was followed by emotion on the podium. Just getting to these games was a struggle after a serious wrist injury.
To be honest, Andy, was probably the first time in my life that I really felt disabled. And that was 20 years after becoming disabled. So it was probably a bit of a rock bottom moment, and now we sit here today with this.
It was also thumbs up in the athletics for Dunfermline's Owen Miller as he ripped up the form book with a brilliant run to take the 1500 metres title. In the high jump, meanwhile, Jonathan Broome-Edwards produced the leap of his life. After silver in Rio, it was gold in Tokyo. The world champion, finally the Paralympic champion. Well, the British team have reached a milestone today, the 100 medal mark. They were set a target at these games of between 100 and 140 medals, and still they keep coming. There was another one for the remarkable Richard Whitehead, but not the gold he's used to. The 200 metres saw a changing of the guard from the 45-year-old to a 19-year-old. South Africa's Ntando Malangu didn't walk until he was 10. Now he'd beaten one of the all-time greats. His wasn't the only extraordinary talent on show. Yan Shu of China beating Will Bailey as Britain lost out in the table tennis final. And then there was the wheelchair tennis. If there was a prize for shot of the year, well, Alfie Hewitt might have just won it. It wasn't enough for Hewitt and Gordon Reid to win their doubles final, but in defeat, they did at least have one of the day's most dazzling moments. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Tokyo.
Fantastic. Let's take a look at the weather. Here's Nick Miller.
Hi Jane, the weather's been stuck in a rut this week, a cloudy rut for many of us. Gradual changes this weekend as high pressure moves away eastwards, and by Sunday more readily brightening up and turning a bit warmer in England and Wales, whereas at the same time those parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland that have seen most of the sunshine this week, there's a chance of rain moving in. But right now it's as you were. There's a lot of cloud out there, just some late sunny spells across southern England and into Wales. Cloud probably building again though here overnight, but there are some clear spells, some patchy mist and fog where you've got cloud. It could be drizzly and fog on the hills as well, and temperatures for the most part holding up into double figures. And you guessed it, a lot of cloud around again to start the day tomorrow, and for most it'll stay that way. Where might we see some sunny spells? Parts of northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England, maybe more so across southern England into East Anglia quite late in the day though. The cloud thick enough for drizzly rain in places, and coming in from the North Sea it really will feel quite cool with that cloud and the chance of drizzle and the breeze. Eastern Scotland and northeast England around 15 degrees. Some of us near 20. Few of us getting into the low 20s if you get prolonged sunny spells. This is how Saturday evening is shaping up. Maybe a bit more sunshine to end the day, but then on Sunday, after any mist and fog patches clear away, the cloud in England and Wales clearing more readily, so some sunny spells coming through. It'll feel warmer, though maybe still some areas of cloud across parts of eastern England lingering. And there, with uncertain timing of arrival, the chance of seeing some rain gradually pushing in towards Scotland and Northern Ireland with a freshening breeze. That tries to move south overnight into Monday, before clearing northwards and allowing some very warm weather to arrive for some of us for a time early next week anyway. It may well feel like summer's final fling. Jane.
Thank you, Nick. And that is all from the news at 6. Now we'll join the BBC's news teams wherever you are. Bye-bye.